This is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the biggest films in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. Welcome, you're listening to Jay's Analysis and Esoteric Hollywood. Tonight my guest is Adam Weishaupt. Yes, the actual founder of the Bavarian Illuminati is speaking to us from beyond the grave. We've channeled him through my scrying materials that I borrowed from John Dee. I'm kidding, it's Adam Weishaupt of Illuminatiwatcher.com. Adam, how are you?
Good. Actually, Jay, my poorly chosen pseudonym is Isaac Weishaupt.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right. You know, it's actually a mistake that I've heard other people make, and I almost feel bad I chose such a awful pseudonym when I first started getting into this conspiracy game. I thought it was such a clever little thing because I had Illuminatiwatcher with the IW, and then I got called to do a radio show, and I didn't even have a name at that point, a pseudonym, I should say.
Yeah.
And They wanted one, so I thought it was so clever to do Isaac Weishaupt, but
I remember coming across your stuff several years ago. I think back when I wrote an Eyes Wide Shut analysis. I remember you linked it, and then I think you linked a couple other things I did, like an analysis of Resident Evil. So I'm familiar with your stuff, and I've followed you off and on, over the last several years, and I think you've had discussions with Jamie. Jamie's here as well, and we're going to talk about the last couple, I guess you could say, mega ritual events, which would be the Super Bowl halftime show, and probably the Super Bowl as a whole, I guess you could argue, as well as the Grammys last night or 2 nights ago, whenever it was. And you guys have done a lot of analyses of the pop music sphere. This is not something that I've really spent a lot of time on, so I want to let you guys have a lot of the floor tonight for sure. But let's start with Super Bowl. Jamie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Yep, and we're going to talk about both you guys' books as well. And so, with our esteemed guest, tell us what you noticed at the Super Bowl. Did you get any negative vibes from that?
The Super Bowl. So when I heard Coldplay was going to be performing at the Super Bowl, it raised a lot of strange red flags in my mind because like most people, I thought, well, that's kind of an odd choice for a testosterone-fueled sporting event to have Coldplay come out, because they're very, I don't know, mainstream kind of like music your girlfriend listens to type music, and I thought it was kind of odd. And then it could be a combination of things, but I started researching Coldplay because that's not a band I'm into. Mm-hmm. And I saw a lot of themes of kind of like that new age flavor that they've got, which is,
exactly,
popular amongst Hollywood elite. And so I researched a lot of Coldplay stuff, and I kind of thought, well, they're not overtly Satan worshippers like some of these darker artists, but they do have a lot of new age stuff, and I thought, well, it'll probably have a new age flavor to it.
Well, I actually am a Coldplay fan to a degree, just in terms of the music, and I know they're kind of effeminate, and I like to make un-PC jokes, so don't take me too seriously with this. But after that halftime show, I was calling them cold gay. But if you look at the album, I remember when I really started listening to them, and I actually went and saw them in concert in Nashville. But the album Viva la Vida, or Death and All of His Friends, when that came out, I got it, and I paid attention to the lyrics in that album pretty intently, and it's curious that the cover of the album actually features the French Masonic revolutionary image of Lady Liberty leading the revolutionaries, against the monarchy. And when you listen to the lyrics of a bunch of the songs, you'll notice that he makes these strange references to Fox News and to how banks are now cathedrals, and our new religion is this worship of money and the money system and so forth, and some of which sounds pretty good. It's a pretty good message. But when you listen to the other lyrics and the artistic imagery on the album and other things that Chris Martin has said, you get the idea that his dialectical impression is that, to fight the system, you join with something like, Masonic, New Agey / anything that the mainstream might consider liberal. And this, of course, dates back to the time of the French Revolution. In Chris Martin's mind, I guess that's supposed to be what's anti-establishment. But in fact, in my view, I don't know what your view is, but in my view, that actually is the view of the establishment. It's not actually anti-establishment to promote the Illuminism of the French Revolution. And, speaking of Adam Weishaupt, it was his philosophy that was very influential for most of the Illuminists of the French Revolution, like Voltaire, Diderot, Robespierre, and so forth.
Man, that's why I love you, Jay. You're so smart. Because I, a lot.
It's not a
my
Coldplay fan. That's all. I listen over the.
My field of study is very. I'm more of like a TMZ of conspiracy theories because I kind of, I work full time and I've got this whole personal life that dictates a lot of my time, and sometimes I just don't have the the time to get into a lot of the historical stuff or some of the deeper philosophical arguments here. But I did research the Coldplay stuff, and from that album you were talking about, what was it called, Viva La Vida or something like that?
Yeah, Death and All His Friends, right?
The one thing I found was that they worked with Brian Eno to produce this album, and Eno was kind of famous for working with David Bowie and the like.
Yeah, good point.
And Eno created a set of tarot cards,
wow,
a la Aleister Crowley, and he had each member of Coldplay was given a card at random, and they were supposed to interpret the instruction musically for the album.
Wow!
So it kind of has like an occult tone to it. So
I had no idea about that, and Brian Eno's done all kinds of stuff, right? I mean, he's been all up in the music biz of the industry for a long time.
Yeah, most definitely.
So he's worked with, as you said, Bowie, Devo, Genesis, U2, of course. Quite a bit of big time people, and it's funny that I was just looking up his Wikipedia here, and we watched Dune the other day, and that's actually a pretty esoteric film about initiation. And I don't know if you've ever read Frank Herbert's Dune, but it's pretty hardcore, and it's actually Brian Eno wrote the prophecy theme for the film Dune. Just a side note there, but so he's definitely involved in the esoteric side of the music industry.
Yeah, it seemed like his influence, because all that kind of, so like the original Dune was supposed to be filmed by Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Right.
And Jodorowsky, obviously an occultist, if anyone's seen any of his films. And what's odd is in one of the videos on that album, Viva La Vida, Coldplay's Chris Martin is shown dissolving. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the key tenets of the occult is dissolution of the ego. Mm-hmm. And that's what, Crowley talked about when you're approaching the abyss is the dissolving of your ego. And that's one of the themes in Jodorowsky's Holy Mountain. I don't know if you've ever seen that film.
I have. It's crazy. And
yeah, totally crazy, huh? But that's the main theme of that movie is these initiates that are getting brought through the occult rituals, and one of the key aspects is when they dissolve the ego. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of ironic. We kind of and that's like everything else in this kind of conspiracy world. It's you see all of these symbols, and it's like the same exact themes, just with different kind of flavors and looks.
Yeah,
and that's what makes people kind of put some validity into a lot of these conspiracies, is because you see this, like Aleister Crowley, the dude pops up in practically everything you start researching.
Yeah, and in my view, it gets a little cliche and a little tiring. I mean, how many times can we see pyramids on stage? How many times can we see Britney Spears or Lady Gaga doing the same kind of stuff over and over and over? And yet they continue to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And what kills me is because I get into a lot of arguments with people. Sometimes I get into it with the trolls online, but the the argument I always go back to is, look, if these artists are so creative, why do they give us the same exact stuff over and over? Like, even if you don't want to believe
Right.
in the Illuminati or any of this conspiracy garbage or symbolism, the fact remains that these people are hailed as the greatest minds and creative thinkers of our time, but they're giving us the same exact symbols.
Well, Yeezy is God, isn't he? He's
That's
Yeezus.
Yeah, listen to him. He'll tell you all about
The
it.
new Yeezus. Jamie, what'd you see in the Super Bowl? What came to your attention?
Well, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the symbol that they used on their new album called A Head Full of Dreams, which is the flower of life. And anybody who starts looking at conspiracies and starts digging into things like masonry, you're going to come across geometry, and you're going to start learning things about sacred geometry and the platonic solids and things like that. So I wanted to kind of ask what you thought about their usage of the flower of life, because this is kind of a thing that came out. I think Drum Below Melchizedek was pretty much the first time I ever heard of this symbol. And
Oh yeah, that's the name that gets brought up in Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, is that Melchizedek.
And so I was just kind of looking up the flower of life and what it means and stuff like that, and I thought this was really interesting. But it says, this structure forms the basis for music, as the distances between the spheres is identical to the distances between the tones and the halftones in music. It is also identical to the cellular structure of the third embryonic division, when the first cell divides into 2 cells, then to 4 cells, then to 8. So this is the same. This is like the basis of life, and it was they claim that it's a very old, ancient symbol. Like, they claim that they found it in pyramids and religions of all across the world. And so he's taken the symbol and he's actually put a rainbow on top of it. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Okay, yeah, that sacred geometry seems to show up in a lot of stuff, and to see Coldplay do it is not surprising, because out of that flower of life you can also find the Kabbalah tree of life.
Right.
And when we watch the Super Bowl, you'll notice Chris Martin, Bruno Mars, and Beyonce, they all come down onto the stage, and whether this was purposefully crafted or not, I don't know, but it is ironic. They all, when they come on stage, they come through the black flattened cube, which is it's a black hexagram on the stage. And the flattened cube is present in the Tree of Life with the top 6 Sephiroth. But the purpose of this, I believe, is it's showing kind of like an alchemical process, the blackening. And I'm sorry?
The Negredo phase.
The Negredo, yes. So it seems, so like when you research Chris Martin, it sounds like he actually had issues with Gwyneth Paltrow, his ex-wife, I suppose she is now. His ex-wife, her belief in Kabbalah. But now I'm curious if that's changing, because he's got all of these kind of New Age kind of symbols, and he came through on through the black hexagram, which is like the Tree of Life, and maybe he's an alchemical initiate in the blackening.
Well, another thing that I noticed too about the performance was that you did see the flower of life, and you also saw the promotion of the rainbow through the gay flag. So you had a lot of people in the audience who were waving the rainbow flag that were supposed to be this. It was supposed to be kind of a multicultural audience that ran out to be there by the stage. It was sort of like a staged crowd that ran out, and many of them had the rainbow flag. And the reason I bring that up is because if you do take this Crowleyan line on it, which I think is probably pretty accurate, he talked a lot about anal sex, and anal sex is he said, according to Crowley, more sacred than actual vaginal sex, because you have the eye of Isis, which is the vagina, and then you have the other end, right, which is, in his view, more powerful. And so I see the promotion of, I pointed this out in some of my analyses in the last couple of years, where I think we've seen, this is a little base and maybe bizarre, but I think there's something to it. The promotion of the ass, believe it or not, with Kim Kardashian and songs that promote the anal aspect of things, as well as both first and second season True Detective shows were focused on the anal. And so I deal with that pretty extensively in my analysis of that show. And I think there's a reason for this. And I think it's to invert things and to move things away from the life-giving process that would happen through vaginal sex, and rather to in terms of magic, the anal aspect of it would be an inversion in a sense, or sodomy. And Crowley has statements where he said, we'll invade England through sodomy, and we'll, bring about the storming of heaven through the reversal of what's considered, quote, natural. And so, as you well know, in that view, things are inverted for the purpose of black magic. So I see the promotion of the rainbow flag on top of the flower of life as kind of an inverse of the notion of what life actually is, because you don't produce at least human life from anal sex. That figures prominently in like the 10th or 11th degree of the OTO. So that's what I think is a big part of this. And you talked about that Negredo phase, or the blackening. We've seen this being promoted in mainstream media and the music industry as well, through this idea of the black god or the magical Negro. And I'm not being racist when I say that. That's an actual thing that blacks, even somebody like Spike Lee, actually criticizes the notion of the magical Negro, because this is an old literary trope of the idea that there's some sort of special supernatural significance to someone who merely because they're black. You can find, Spike Lee actually going off on this idea, for example. So it's a very controversial racial thing that's out there. But I think that that's kind of what Beyonce's role was with this whole Black Panthers idea, with Jay-Z and these different rappers talking about the black gods and so forth.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the rainbow, you're talking about the Crowley's sex magic stuff, and a lot of that anal sex stuff takes us to the base frequency, just like you were saying, where it takes us away from the life-giving kind of frequency. I'm going into like some kind of the woo-woo chakra stuff here, but a lot of people believe that the anus is actually more of a lower form of intimacy, or whatever you want to call it. But the rainbow is also, we were talking about Eyes Wide Shut earlier. You see that in Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut a lot, and in The Wizard of Oz, which was by the Theosophist Frank Baum.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the spectrum of light. And so a lot of the esoteric writers will speak of Lucifer as sort of clothed in the 7 colors of the rainbow, right? The full spectrum. So I think there's a Luciferian aspect to light, because light comes in that full spectrum of colors, and it's Lucifer who's supposed to be the light bringer, the angel of light. And you see people like Blavatsky, talking in that vein. And when you're talking about theosophy, you're talking about Blavatsky. So I think it's a Luciferian thing. And in fact, if you go to the early origins of the modern gay rights movement, as well as NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, you come across a figure named Harry Hay. And Harry Hay is sort of the father of the gay rights movement. He was also a member of the Agape Lodge in California. So he was also in the OTO, and it was a big deal for him to promote homosexual rights. And so what I'm getting at is that there's, in my view, a clear connection between civil rights, Black Panthers, Black Lives Matter, and all this stuff that comes out of this, originates in the 60s. And then now the new civil right is homosexuality. And that's not my speculation. That's actually 100% what is argued on the part of homosexual lobby groups, is that they're arguing that, well, we're just another version of the 60s civil rights movement. So I see that as the connection between Black Lives Matter being promoted at the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they're trying to push. I'm like an equal rights kind of guy. I support all of that kind of stuff. But there is an interesting theory that is this idea of breaking down diversity.
Right.
So getting rid of the differences actually makes us all the same, and I don't really support living in a world like that where everyone's the same, because then we're a bunch of robots.
Absolutely.
I mean, obviously these groups need equal rights, and things happen to these people that shouldn't. So, it's an issue to consider, but there's supposedly a larger agenda at play of breaking down the diversity and kind of homogenizing the whole world.
Well, that's what I think. Yeah, the corporate global monoculture is the real plan.
Yes.
That's the most amenable to especially to corporations, and then ultimately to depopulation and so forth. Jamie, what do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a stretch if we're talking about magic and all this stuff. I was noticing that the stage that Coldplay had is set up in the same manner as the Rosy Cross of the Golden Dawn, and that's a really colorful thing also, with all the colors in the center like Coldplay was doing. And he also had a kind of multicultural theme.
Yeah, he wore a patch that said, "I'm a global citizen."
Exactly, and so that's kind of a red flag for people like us. And then I also wanted to mention, at the beginning, you did have the Scarlet Woman come out in the form of Lady Gaga singing the national anthem, right?
Yeah, that's true. The Rosy Cross ordeal is, I guess some interpretations of it are that it symbolizes the evolution of mankind, which is like the highest overall theme of this whole Illuminati conspiracy, as far as I can tell from the research I'm doing, is not so, like, it seems to me that some of these, there's different kind of flavors of occultists. There's some that are overt kind of satanic Luciferians, and then there's others that are perhaps like Chris Martin. They're just into like a new age feel good type thing. But either way, they all kind of subscribe to this idea of evolving mankind's consciousness and making us a better race of people and changing the way we think, which has its merits, sure, but the problem is that they're trying to fill a void with Luciferian doctrine when you look at it. And the Rosy Cross represents this evolution of human consciousness through the unfolding rose, which is representative of the mind.
Well, what did you think of Beyonce's performance? So she comes out as a Black Panther, right? And she's getting so much backlash from law enforcement and other governments for being so militant, but she was only wearing something that Michael Jackson had worn in a past Super Bowl halftime show. And
yeah, that was funny because I quickly saw something was up because, Coldplay comes out, they do a couple songs, then Bruno Mars comes out, he does a song, but then Beyonce comes out, and it seemed to me that Beyonce was secretly the headliner of this whole show. And after the fact, that's pretty well proven because she stole the show and she's been the most talked about celebrity since then. So I think there was an agenda to make her kind of the most prominent artist out of the show for various reasons. Beyonce being in this quote unquote Illuminati. But yeah, when she came out, she brought all of her dancers had the berets that the Black Panthers wore.
Well,
and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, go ahead. I was just talking about, there was some symbolic Black Panther representation there, and she's obviously tied into the Black Lives Matter movement. Her and Jay-Z have been funneling money to various supporters of the Black Lives movement, like the protesters that go to prison. They were giving money to bail them out secretly.
Right, and it was George Soros actually that put $33 million into Ferguson and Black Lives Matter, and that came out in mainstream news. And that's curious because, Beyonce was actually talking about how the cops are basically racist and, guns are evil, and et cetera, et cetera. Yet she actually had a 20 police car escort, I believe, to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know Soros had dumped that much cash into it. That should tell you something.
well,
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
well, did you notice that the first line of her song called Formation says, "Y'all haters corny with that Illuminati mess"?
Yeah, I did see that. I instantly looked it up, and sure enough, that is the lyric. I was watching Real Time with Bill Maher last week, and the rapper Killer Mike was on there, and he talked about this exact line of the song, and he made a claim that it didn't. I'm paraphrasing, but he more or less said that he didn't mention anything about it being the conspiracy theory Illuminati thing that we're talking about, or most conspiracy theorists talk about. He made it sound like she was basically making a statement, look, I'm not part of the establishment, which I thought was kind of interesting because, are we now accepting that the establishment is the Illuminati? Because it was kind of taken for granted that that's what he meant when he said it. But yeah, that is indeed the first line, and I don't know, I haven't been able to find a good interpretation of what she says that's supposed to mean. But like I said, Killer Mike said that I guess there was backlash because she didn't show up to one of the Black Lives Matters protests, and all the, I don't know about all, but the black community that was taking issue with that said she's in the Illuminati because she didn't show up to the thing, and that was why she said what she said. But to me, it seems like it's all just like kind of spinning out of context of what of what we're trying to talk about here. But I've been looking at I don't know if you guys noticed this. I rant and rave about this all the time. But Charles Manson, the Helter Skelter thing,
right?
He talked about all the, and in the 60s was like, to me, like the most crucial period of pushing the big Illuminati agenda, the Age of Aquarius.
Absolutely.
And his Helter Skelter. And Manson was very well in tune with occult belief systems. He definitely knew some things. In prison, he learned a lot of this stuff. Mm-hmm. He learned mind control techniques, that kind of thing. And this Helter Skelter was the race where he believed he could initiate and then step up as the leader. So he was going to use the Black Panthers, ironically, to start this thing. And that's why when they murdered, I think it was the LaBiancas, they put on the wall, political piggy, and then they did a print in blood that looked like a paw print, which is what the Black Panthers were using at the time. Mm-hmm. So to me, this seemed like, because I've been writing this book on the Manson thing for like a year now, maybe 2 years, and I just can't finish it because things keep popping up to support this idea that there is a impending race war that they're trying to initiate.
Oh, absolutely. That's what I was getting at with the whole, up with the black gods and down with the white devils. This is the establishment's promoting this on purpose to provocateur, and it's all the techniques of what's called agitprop or agitation propaganda. Other things that I noticed that were interesting, I don't mean to change the subject, just some other things that stood out when I was watching, is all the military propaganda. And so the whole Super Bowl is generally attended with, troops standing around and saluting the flag, and jets fly over and all this stuff, which is, some display of prowess. And then in the midst of all this propaganda, we're all playing football and we're watching, people throw the pigskin, and we're not realizing that, of course, what this means is we are going to bomb the shit out of other countries, right? And the curiosity of this is that, while we're sitting here enjoying this game and believing in some notion of so-called patriotism, we're simultaneously funding terrorists through ISIS and so forth, right? So the U.S. and the CIA created ISIS, I believe. And so the enemies that we're supposedly protecting ourselves against are created by our own establishment elites, much like a Super Bowl game is, in my view, kind of fake. I mean, I'm not saying that people don't play the game, but if you look at the work of Brian Toohey, who's a sports writer who's worked with the FBI and dealt with game rigging, he has an extensive catalog of sports fraud, referee, umpire fraud, etc., that deals with how many games have actually been thrown and how much of this is rigged. And if you think about it, when you've got billions of dollars wrapped up in something, you're probably not going to leave it to chance. Thus, it makes sense why, these games that we think are, these real teams playing it out on the field, battling to see who's got the best talent, that's probably not what's going on. And in fact, we had with international soccer, there was a big scandal this last year with game rigging there as well that came out, and that actually tied into geopolitical issues with Russia and the West. And so what I'm getting at is that the pseudo-realistic nature of the football game is much like the pseudo-realistic nature of foreign policy and politics, right? I mean, we control the bad guys. And in the same way, background players can, big time players, billionaires and so forth, can actually control the outcomes of these games when they need to.
Interesting. Yeah, the Super Bowl is definitely, it's like these other high profile events. I don't know if where this Super Bowl ranks, but the Super Bowls generally over the last few years have been the most watched, viewed television program ever. So I think the last Super Bowl, they were selling ads for $5 million for a spot. So to me, that tells me there's power in the symbolism, because these commercials, the people that buy these ads, like, why do you think they're spending $5 million? Because they know that the symbolism has an effect, and that effect has a return on investment for them.
Yes, absolutely.
So to think that if you do believe in an Illuminati or some kind of secret elite group, of course they're going to plant some kind of message in this thing. People are spending $5 million for a commercial, so why wouldn't they? So.
Well, let's talk about the commercials for a second, because I actually sat through and watched most of them. And I noticed last year with Katy Perry, they had a lot of the commercials actually went along with the performance theme.
Yeah.
And alien abduction. I know we talked about that last year, right? Mm-hmm. But then I was just kind of jotting down what my impression was of what they want young men to be thinking about today. And it was basically military service, cars, useless statistics, meaningless role models, which are the athletes, right? Alcohol, soft drinks, and cheerleaders. And the graphics, I thought, were extremely hypnotic. And then one of the first ones I took a note about was actually Willem Dafoe as Marilyn Monroe for Snickers.
Marilyn Dafoe.
Yeah. So that was pretty disturbing, and it kind of goes along with the theme of transgender and, everything we've been talking about. Did you have any thoughts on... Well, and Marilyn Monroe, she's like the poster child for the Monarch Mind Control program, because she was one of the first presidential models, right?
Right, yeah, and Beyonce even, I wrote a little like mini ebook on exploring Beyonce's Illuminati involvement, and I was able to find a photo of her with the diamond in her mouth, which is the idea that there's this diamond programming kind of a presidential sex slave, which was Marilyn Monroe, allegedly.
Right. And then the second kind of weird commercial that I saw, where it was a running commercial where they had several of them, but it was the Super Bowl babies in winning cities. So,
football is family.
Yeah, that was their slogan. So they said that whenever the city of the team wins the Super Bowl, there's a rise in birth rates in that city.
Well,
I saw that too. Yeah, I was curious about that. I didn't know if they were serious or not.
It was serious, and that blew me away as well, because if you think traditionally, people would say, well, where does new life come from? Well, God grants us new life. He creates new life. God's given us a child, etc. The idea here being that, it's now the ritual practice of the Super Bowl that actually gives new life, and which is curious given the fact that we live in the midst of a culture of death that is not pro-life. So that now the Super Bowl grants us new life and our progeny. And I literally think that the idea is supposed to be that for the masses, Super Bowl and football is the new religion. It's actually treated that way. It's a yearly ritual or a monthly, weekly ritual, depending upon how seriously people take the football season. I live in Tennessee, and you cannot go, a mile down the road before you see somebody in Tennessee with orange promoting University of Tennessee. And in fact, there are actual caskets that are painted orange for University of Tennessee. And so our blood runs orange here, we're told. And so people literally worship football. It's their god, and of course, by extension, pro sports as a whole. That's probably the most, as you said, the most watched thing. That even probably beats Hollywood, except for maybe some big movie like Star Wars or something. It's really the NFL and the NBA and so forth that people treat with religious fervor now, more so even than any kind of church or religious gathering.
And that's really disturbing. The idea that that it is true that, like, on the commercial, that football grants life is the message there. And I don't disagree with you. I think, because I used to watch pretty much all sports when I was a kid until I was about 16.
Yeah.
And then I moved on with life, and then
up.
Yeah, right. You would think so, but then, like, as an adult, I work in an office with other dudes, and every Monday they're talking about football, and every year I'm like, God, I really got to get back into football just to have something to talk to, because I'm always like the.
Well, if you're not into football or sports, you will not have any connect with the rest of the population.
Yeah. I just can't identify with it anymore, and every year I try to get into it, and like my hometown team was the Eagles from Philly there, and I remember when I first I gave it a real shot to try to get back into football, and that was around the time the Michael Vick thing happened, and then the Eagles signed him, and I'm a huge, like, dog lover, so, like, the fact that everyone deserves some forgiveness and whatever, but, like, to me, I was kind of like, that's disgusting. I don't want to associate with that team.
It's interesting to me that the majority of people aren't going to be interested in false flags or 9/11 or phony wars in Syria and ISIS and so forth, but they will be concerned with Deflategate.
Yeah, that's true.
Like that's a huge scandal, right? But like the president, illegally bombing other countries is not a scandal.
Yeah, I think to me, I just get like looking at it from the outside when I see the guys that are into the football thing. It feels so programmed to me, and I'm not trying to judge people that like football. By all means, enjoy it. It's just not for me, and that's fine. But to me, it seems like it's a byproduct of this kind of oligarchy corporation kind of programming. Because, for instance, there's an example. Like, when you talk to someone, I got a friend, and when I talk to him, or if we're in a group and he's talking about how he watched his team play, they always talk like they own the team. They're like, yeah, my Bears lost the other day or whatever. And I'm like, dude, shut up. Like, you don't own the Bears. But they'll be like, they get upset. They throw stuff at the house and they act like children.
It's a replacement version of belonging. Since, traditionally speaking, people would be interested in their heritage or their tribe or their whatever their background was. We don't really have that anymore, and now what we have is Hollywood and pro sports, and so you're given this WWF version of which team or hero to be on the side of, and politics is exactly the same. This whole thing with Donald Trump. The guy's a billionaire reality TV star. He's an actor. And so the politics is just as much WWF as football. And so, yeah, I see it as just a replacement social engineering tool for, how people can feel that they have a connection with other people. It's my team, right?
Yeah, I heard Joe Rogan talk about the whole tribal instinct thing, and it seems like maybe that's an idea to consider, is that they've broken us up from these small, close-knit tribal groups to these large groups. Now there's no sort of, there's no, for men specifically, there's no like coming to manhood kind of initiation, so people are left to kind of feel like they got to belong somewhere, and football will gladly take anybody.
Exactly. That's your camaraderie with your fellow dudes in simulated combat.
Yeah, exactly. And Trump scares me because I don't know if you guys have ever seen Idiocracy, but he's just like President Camacho. all he's missing is to be a porn star, and then he's got it.
Well, Trump's had enough wives, and he's runs the Miss America or Miss Universe or whatever he runs. So I'm sure
right.
Run through plenty of those.
Yeah, right.
Jamie, what else did you see?
Well, I wanted to talk about two more strange commercials I saw. Was one, the astronaut, I don't know if it was Buzz Aldrin or which one was it?
It was either Neil or Buzz, I can't remember, but I wrote this in my notes too.
Yeah, for Audi, and their slogan was choosing the moon. Mm-hmm. And then there was old Giorgio Tsoukalos, who, if you look at things that we look at, you're going to come across this guy who actually took over for Zecharia Sitchin. And he was in a Taco Bell commercial right there with his, crazy hair. And this is the guy who's been on History Channel promoting Ancient Aliens for several years, even so much so that he's a meme now for this Ancient Aliens thing.
I think the quesalupa that he's promoting in that Taco Bell commercial or whatever it was is itself the alien.
He said it's going to be bigger than aliens.
Food. Oh, that's right. He did say that, yeah.
So
alien food, I guess.
Yeah.
Genetically modified like his hair.
Like his GMO hair.
I don't know how much I trust, Giorgio Tsoukalos' work, only because it's so promoted by the History Channel.
Yeah, I used to be into Ancient Aliens hardcore. When I wrote my first book, I had a whole kind of like a defense of it because there's a 4-hour documentary online by Chris White called Ancient Aliens Debunked, and in it he kind of debunks Ancient Aliens, and I admit that he had a lot of great arguments, but I was kind of like, yeah, but aliens or whatever. And now I'm starting to, like, my perspective on things is starting to change, because originally when I started down this path, I was kind of like frustrated with so many conspiracy theorists that always took it back to like Bible thumping Christianity stuff, and even though I'm a Christian, I'm kind of like, you know what, like, because they don't know how to like kind of tone it down a little bit. So I started going down the path, and I kind of believed in aliens, and and I still kind of I can believe in aliens. I just don't think they're the same thing that I thought before. However, what I'm getting at is the alien agenda seems to be either there's aliens and this quote unquote Illuminati are using them to try to trick us into worshiping some kind of evil demonic entity, or there is no such thing as aliens and they're trying to get us to worship some kind of further evolved entity or believe in evolution to the point of superiority from some kind of alien race for when they do show up. And Ancient Aliens is produced by Prometheus, which is a pretty big clue right there. And I'm not saying I don't watch Ancient Aliens, I still like it, but my perspective on that whole alien thing is starting to change now, and I'm kind of seeing like, oh man, this is kind of not what I thought it was originally.
Well, I think pretty soon they're going to roll out some kind of disclosure, and aliens are going to be a big deal in the near future.
Oh yeah, for sure.
What was I going to say?
Yeah, NASA's already planting that seed. They said by 2025 that will confirm that aliens do exist. So I'm sure I don't know how they come up with that prediction, but I'm sure it'll happen.
Well, in my view, the reason they come up with that is because NASA's actually under the aegis of the military. It's a military operation. I believe it's under the Air Force. And NASA is a PR front. And so if you look at NASA, they've been putting out this claim of discovering alien life for decades. In fact, every few years, NASA claims to have found life on Mars or the Moon or something like this. And then it's like in the news for a week, and then it's gone. So in my view, it's just a perpetual feed of bullshit that's not true. And you can just see mountains of skullduggery and deception on the part of NASA, in my view. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't supernatural or spiritual things that are true. I think there are. But that doesn't mean that NASA's true. I think NASA's full of shit, basically. I really do think they operate as just a psyop front. That's a huge aspect of what the military does. If you get into researching psychological warfare, that's more important for warfare than actual, combat or blowing shit up. More important is to control the perception of the audience or the target enemy mind or whatever.
Yeah, hearts and minds. Exactly.
So, anything else that stood out for the Super Bowl number 50? I thought it was weird that it was that promotion of choosing the moon on the part of Audi, because it was Audi that was at the Super Bowl last year, two Super Bowls back, I think, that was promoting that idea of having green police. And this would be the idea that we would hire all these bureaucrats to actually go around and give people tickets for using too much toilet paper or flushing their toilet twice, which is just the most ridiculous invasion of privacy and absurdity. And that sounds like over the top, but if you look at places where these things are really promoted, places like California or in Europe, the green agenda has, moved far ahead of other places, especially like here in the South. We don't really deal with a lot of that. I remember getting a ticket one time for $70 because I drove into North Carolina and I didn't have a tag that said that my emissions had been checked. So I just drove into this place and they immediately said, you've got to pay $70 because you don't have a tag that says your emissions have been checked. I mean, so this to me is just a huge racket. It's a huge scam. The whole green agenda is all that. But the NFL has gone along consistently with promoting Obamacare, promoting gun restrictions, promoting the green agenda, and openly now in the last couple of years especially promoting the homosexual agenda. So I'm not trying to fixate on that topic. I'm just saying that the same power structure is pushing all of these across the board for a reason. They're not stupid. They know what they're doing in promoting this package deal, right? That's the thing. It's not like, the NFL's only concerned with Obamacare or something. It's across the board, this totality that they want to push.
Yeah, that's true. It's just like any kind of legislation. You got to take the whole package, which is full of smaller riders and whatnot, versus just one single issue. They package as much stuff into it as they can, so naturally they're going to push the agenda, the ultimate agenda, and that's the question. That's the key question behind all of this: is what is the agenda? Where's the end game of all of this?
One thing I'd like to ask you guys, both of you, before we move on to the Grammys, is so Lady Gaga came out in red, and so you think that's like a reference to the Scarlet Woman?
I definitely do, and I have a whole chapter about Beyonce being the new Madonna of pop culture and pretty much the icon of new ISIS in the world, which is a female who has no inhibitions and uses her sexuality in the counterpart of the Anne of Horus's sexuality, so they match in degenerate behavior.
Yeah, we saw that Scarlet Woman symbolism last year, right, Jamie, with Katy Perry.
Oh, definitely.
What would you guys? For the benefit of the audience, talk a little bit about the Scarlet Woman. Of course, we know this comes from the Book of Revelation, chapter 17 and 18. But what do you read from that when you say Scarlet Woman? What do you get from that?
So it's supposed to kind of usher in the end times, and this is another one of these tie-ins to Aleister Crowley. He was always hunting for the Scarlet Woman, and even some of the Crowleyites like Jack Parsons. We're talking about JPL, which was pretty much the founders of NASA, and then founder of Church of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. They were trying to conduct rituals in order to bring this Scarlet Woman, the Babylon workings, they called it. So it's just like a recurring theme that you see in the Bible as well. It's this whore of Babylon that's supposed to bring about the end of times and kind of represents the embodiment of evil at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that the Hermetic perspective and that occult perspective sees the Book of Revelation as an actual sort of Gnostic magical text. And, Crowley kind of had this idea that he could purge Christianity and return it to its pagan sex magic roots in his mind. And so he treated the book of what's called the Apocalypse of John as an actual kind of ritual text where these creatures like the beast or the whore of Babylon were actual sort of spirits that could be invoked, and through ritual ceremonial magic that you could actually cause these things to have their effect in the world, right? So the coming of the Scarlet Woman would be the ritual enactment of the whore of Babylon into the world, into our plane of existence, so to speak.
Yes, and in the end, she represents the Antichrist of sorts, and in the film Metropolis, Fritz Lang, 1927, the scientist in there creates this woman who is supposed to be the whore of Babylon, and to me it seems like from a higher kind of altitude perspective of the whole thing, it's what they're saying is not much further from the transhuman movement, because in Metropolis, the scientist creates this robotic woman, the Scarlet Woman, the Whore of Babylon, whatever you want to call her. And what this is, it's a bastardization of creating life. And that is in defiance of God creating life. So
Exactly.
Essentially, it's, the Antichrist doesn't have the pitchfork and the devil horns, but it's still the same principle at play.
Yeah, it's the idea of blending species in an act of in other words, bestiality, for example, is an act of inversion, and reportedly Crowley was involved in bestiality acts. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but the idea of blending the species is considered, unnatural. And so when, for example, Jude in the book of Jude talks about Sodom and Gomorrah, he says that was an unnatural situation, and he likens it to the fallen angels' attempt to procreate with women, the Nephilim and all that from Genesis 6. And so in like manner, the idea of transhumanism is the notion of, melding the human with something else, right? The robotic, which I guess in a sense could be a different species, I guess you could argue. But Jamie, you were going to say something about Beyonce.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Metropolis, because I've been chronicling Beyonce for a long time, and one of her processes of initiation a couple years ago was she was seen in concert coming out of the Matrix into the stage dressed in a robotic costume, exactly like the Maria in the character, the Maria robot character in Metropolis. And also she was seen several times photographed on the red carpet with this kind of like robotic hand glove that she was wearing, and even pointing to it and making gestures like this is something. And this is also from the movie Metropolis, where the black sorcerer has to sacrifice a part of himself to animate the robot, so he cuts off his hand and has to have a robotic hand to replace it.
That's right. Yes, very astute. Because like we also see that with sort of like Luke Skywalker with the missing hand.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you're right, because I did kind of like a Beyonce sort of analysis. The video, all the Single Ladies video, she had that robotic hand thing, and that all kind of ties into this transhuman push, which is indeed what the next phase is, because like we were talking about earlier, there's this belief system of the occult that they will evolve mankind, and what they want to do is they want to take us from a time where we worshipped God, Jesus Christ, whichever organized religion you prefer. It seems like it's mostly against Christianity from my perspective, but they want to take us and make man worship man as God. And to make that happen, they need mankind's creation, which is technology, robotics. They need that to become the new giver of life. So they want to kind of force us into this augmenting ourselves with robotics and finding the superiority in that.
Absolutely. 100% agree with that.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is any final words on the Super Bowl? I think that sums it up pretty good. Of course, like we said, last year's with Katy Perry was very, very emblematic with her riding the beast. That one was like pretty blatant.
Well,
Yeah.
She perfectly personified the lust card from Crowley's tarot deck, didn't
Right.
she? With the
One more
dress on the back of the beast.
Yeah, one more thing I was just going to add before I forget. Right after the Super Bowl, Beyonce posted an image to her social media, and on it she does that 666 hand over her eye, which is that whole idea of like the womb of the Illuminati or the children of the Illuminati. I mean, maybe it was just a funny play, but I'm sorry?
Moon children, choose the moon.
Yeah. So it's just one more thing. Like she goes out there talking about, y'all are corny for calling me in the Illuminati, and then she posts that as her next social media image. It's kind of crazy. It's almost like she's taunting people.
It's a middle finger, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, so you've listened to the first hour of Jay's analysis and Esoteric Hollywood, and we've been talking to Isaac Weishaupt of Illuminatiwatcher.com. He has his books for sale there at his site if you want to check it out. Got a lot of articles going back several years dealing with all of these insane pop culture topics that we've been discussing and much more. So definitely check out Illuminati Watcher. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to Jay's Analysis at the PayPal link, and you get my lectures and interviews and much, much more. So you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and this is the second hour for paid subscribers, and we're talking to Isaac Weishaupt of Illuminatiwatcher.com. And it's an interesting site. Check it out. I've checked it out off and on over the last several years. There's a pretty consistent stream of documentation of pop culture madness and craziness, as well as a lot of esoteric stuff. And next we're going to talk about the Grammys and maybe some other stuff like the VMAs and what madness we've seen in those ceremonies and mega rituals. And I really do think they are mega rituals. So before we get into that, let's talk. I want to get, this is my question to both of you guys. When you hear this term, you see it kind of floating around the internet, and you see a mega ritual. What is that, and why? What would be the purpose of that? How would you answer that?
So I'm looking at it from a perspective of there is a concentrated focus of energy and intent, and this kind of goes into more of like a New Age kind of perspective, I suppose. I've read a lot of New Age stuff, and admittedly, it's helped me a lot, and it kind of helps understand the world a little bit. Whether it's right or wrong is a different story, but the kind of focus of energy and intent is there. So if you've got all these people watching and devoting their energy to this event, then I believe there's something that happens with whatever it is they're watching.
Right.
It's almost like we're voting. We're voting with our viewership and our time and our energy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's just like it's kind of like food. You know, you vote with your purchases. If you support genetic modified foods, then by all means go and buy those. But if you don't buy them. So it's kind of like the same energy interplay with television rituals. It's if you don't want to watch, which makes me a hypocrite, obviously, because I watch all this stuff just to try to expose these kind of things. But I believe there's something that happens with the energy when everyone focuses in on certain events. Mm-hmm. Which, again, talking about the Super Bowl with selling $5 million ads, right. There's a value to that.
Jamie, what's a mega ritual?
Yeah, well, I actually have a whole chapter in Hollywood Mind Control that I call High Profile Ritual, and I subtitled it Mystery Religion Rated E for Everyone. So what we're watching is things that used to be done in dark lodges and temples being brought out and put on pop stars for everyone to see, and there's several reasons for this. But I have a good quote that I found by Michael Hoffman from the book called Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. And he says, in the end, what we have is a highly symbolic ritual working, broadcast to millions of people, a satanic inversion, a black mass where the pews are filled by the entire nation and through which humanity is brutalized and debased in this, the Negretto phase of the alchemical process. And we were talking about that in the first hour.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
And so I totally agree with Isaac about it's about the manipulation of the energy of the masses of humanity watching these people and thinking of them with godlike powers, and also to become more comfortable with secret dark rituals that involve things like blood and, voodoo and human sacrifice and sex and channeling interdimensional beings.
So the Grammys, what do we see there? The first thing I thought that stood out was, the ceremony starts, and Kendrick Lamar talks about how to pimp a butterfly.
Yeah.
What is pimping a butterfly?
Maybe MK Ultra Project Monarch. I don't know.
Well, I think it's definitely a reference to that. I mean.
Well, what do we have with a sex operative, which is an actual real thing in espionage, and then I would make that correlation over to the realms of Hollywood with actresses and the sex kitten entertainers. Is that's actually what they do? There's a decent documentary, Secret Societies in Hollywood. I think E made it, but in that documentary they talk about how it's actually pretty much true that the high-priced A-list actresses and chicks that you see in the movies are on the down low call girls. And so if you're a billionaire guy who has a fantasy for, I don't know, Jennifer Connelly or Nicole Kidman or something, then what you do is you arrange your fantasy to be fulfilled for the right price. And if anyone doubts that, you can actually, there's an interview with John Cusack, A-list Hollywood guy, who says that's exactly what happens. In other words, so this idea of them being sex operatives or whatever might sound a little far-fetched, but this is what sex operatives in the realm of espionage and CIA Soviet work have done for a long time. There's nothing, all the way back to the Mata Hari, one of the famous sex spies of espionage fame. So this is nothing new. And what Jamie was saying earlier about just the breaking down of taboos is exactly what Stalin did with his sex spies in the NKVD.
And I noticed that this actually won the best rap album. So this is Kendrick Lamar singing to Pimp a Butterfly. And in his live performance in the Grammys, he comes out in chains, dressed like a chain gang prisoner, and you've got black people in cages dancing, and they're really promoting slavery. And this is kind of a touchy subject for me, because I did a 4-hour talk on FreemanTV.com about black and gay and slavery and all that, and how they are using colonial slavery as some kind of excuse for violent behavior and acting out and trying to change things by force, and militarization of black people, where you see Beyonce at the Super Bowl. And so this, for me, is just really annoying, because my point is that slavery has been something that has gone on since the beginning of humanity, and every race and culture has been involved in it somehow. And so it's not just something that was done to black people exclusively. They have to open their minds and realize that there are many more people in slavery than just in the colonial times.
What about the Chinese slave trade? I've actually read about that, and no one ever talks about reparations on the part of China for the Chinese slave trade.
Right. But this is something they're bringing out to provoke black people, and, like you said before, to cause this Helter-Skelter race war, which I think is not slowing down in any way.
Right. It was interesting, too, at the beginning of the Super Bowl, there's a tie-in to the NFL, because they had two NFL dudes who come out to introduce another NFL guy singing with Carrie Underwood. And this shows, I think, the cross-pollination of these big ceremonies, whatever you want to call them. The VMAs, the NFL, the halftime show, the Grammys, the Emmys, the Oscars, all of these things are all arms of the same establishment, is what I'm trying to get at. So you're going to see similar patterns promoted throughout. And what I saw was, I guess R&B album was D'Angelo's Black Messiah. Then we had this section of the Grammys that dealt with this play called Hamilton, where all the founding fathers are hip hop artists. So there's an and I'm not like a big fan of the founding fathers or anything like that. I think that was a scam as well. But it's interesting that what's happening is kind of the revision of history, where everything's kind of being flipped, and the idea is, like what we were talking about before the interview started with Jay-Z, kind of viewing himself as Jesus, as a kind of Messiah, kind of a God figure. And that's really partly what the doctrine of Hermeticism and Crowleyanism as a whole is to become your own God.
You've confused your deities, Jay. Jay-Z is Jehovah, and Kanye West is Jesus.
That's his son, right? Jay-Z got...
Yeah, that's true, huh?
Jay-Z got Jesus going.
Yeah, that's true. Good find there. Yeah, it seems like it was a continuation. The Grammys from 2015, there were several instances where people were doing that grand hailing sign of distress in Freemasonry, where they put the hands up, don't shoot sign.
And I think this is manipulation, because Masonry historically has been racial. Albert Pike was a Confederate general, and has excluded black people. And so it's curious to me that you have this notion that Jay-Z and all these guys are Masons. I mean, there is the Prince Hall Lodge, but that was really created as a concession, and in my view, all of that is just manipulation. And now we see Beyonce and Jay-Z, I think, taking an interest in Nation of Islam or the 5% Nation or whatever, which is a completely Fed-run entity. And I have a whole interview with the author James Kelly on the topic of the Nation of Islam, if anybody's interested in that. But those are kind of side points. But I think the main point here is that the first, hour and a half, the first half of it was kind of dedicated to this theme.
That Hamilton film, I thought it was quite odd that all of us. So they only show you actually maybe 5 or 6 awards being handed out over this 3-hour show, and one of them, all of a sudden this year, they decided to show us who wins best musical theatrical performance. And like before they even announced it, I was like, it's going to be Hamilton, because at the beginning they had this whole plug for this Hamilton play.
Yeah, exactly.
And sure enough, that's who wins it.
Yeah, and then there was a couple times where it was at the seconds before they were going to announce who, and you could kind of watch the reactions of the 5 people in the so-called running for it, and you could tell kind of which ones already knew they were going to win, and some of the winners were already tapped to perform. So my guess would be that they probably already know ahead of time what's going to happen, and they're probably pretending some of the times, like feigning surprise, I guess.
Yeah.
But a point I'd like to make is the point about the control of the arts, and this is something that I've written a lot of pieces on and talked about in a lot of podcasts, is that we think about the military doing operations for in terms of foreign countries and ISIS or this and that or different wars, and we think of Hollywood or the music industry as this other entity that might have some corrupt leaders or whatever. But no, actually, the military has for a long time been involved in managing and propagandizing through pop culture, whether Hollywood or music. And of course, as we said before, we were talking about Dave McGowan. His book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, actually documents the rise of the both Southern rock movement, the folk rock movement, and the hippie revolution and psychedelic rock as being directly connected to military intelligence. So here you have a direct connect with the military psyops realm into so-called counterculture, anti-establishment, popular music in the 60s. And it's fairly well documented. And then we see this with people like Tim Leary and Aldous Huxley, promoting the drug culture, and of course they're 100% tied up into the establishment. And so when we look at the CIA in Hollywood, what do we see? We see complete cross pollination, where they're almost flip sides of the same coin. And if you listen to Alan Watt, who I've listened to quite a bit, he has a lot of good talks. He used to work in the music industry, and his testimony is that most of what you hear in the popular music is not real organic music. In fact, a lot of the beats, a lot of the riffs, a lot of the background stuff is pre-recorded. They might bring in a studio musician to record, a drum beat or a bass riff or whatever. And then these are all laid over the so-called pop star who comes in and whose voice is auto-tuned. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who's in pop music has no talent or no singing ability. I'm just saying that this goes on a lot more than people think. And so the image that we're given of, you're going to be given an award based on your talent, I think is not true. And it's all pretty much rigged. And a large portion of popular music is not real. It's a manufactured product, just like Pepsi or Coke or whatever.
Yeah, they perfected the whole scheme.
Yeah.
And it becomes evident. I was researching for my hip-hop book, Sacrifice Magic Behind the Mic, and in it became quite clear that these musicians are no different than paid actors. And it's evident because they always cross over back and forth. Actors, musicians to actors. And just like you were saying, I actually just started listening to some of Alan Watts' stuff, who is quite interesting, but another great example is the Wrecking Crew from the 60s.
Bingo. That's in Alan's book, right?
That's, these are supposedly the greatest songs of all time, and I'm not taking anything away from the songs, but these bands who we think wrote all this stuff and performed it, wasn't really the case.
Exactly.
Well, this year the Eagles performed at the Grammys. Did you learn anything about the Eagles in that book?
Oh yeah, there's several chapters that deal with pretty much all the members of the Eagles. Maybe not so much Don Henley, but they're a created band out of Laurel Canyon, and some of them do obviously have musical talent. I'm not saying that they're fake, but they kind of pioneered this idea of the folk rock genre, subgenre, whatever. And they're one of the top selling artists, I guess, of all time. And McGowan points out all the military intelligence connections to the different Eagles. And what I find interesting is that people might find that a stretch. I would say that one of the biggest tells for the Eagles is the fact that after the Eagles broke up and started doing their kind of solo projects, they all were united in promoting the green agenda. And so they were involved in World Wildlife Fund and all this stuff that was started by British eugenicists and elites. And there's a whole foundation thing that Don Henley created that I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but it's all about the green agenda, and it's all directly tied into depopulation. And so I think what part of the counterculture was involved in was what's called the archaic revival, or in that would be the idea that all of modernity, because there are obvious problems in global capitalism, what's the solution? We'll give you a counterculture solution that is the idea of going back to earth worship, going back to Gaia, Mother Earth. And the consequence of this is, of course, that Gaia, Mother Earth, can't sustain these people, and a huge portion of these people, Georgia Guidestones, etc., they need to die. And this is what you see the Eagles promoting, post the 60s and 70s.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned earlier Huxley's name, and I believe that's where the Doors got their name from, was the Doors of Perception, right?
Exactly.
Oh, I was curious. You said something about the Eagles there. I remember there was an urban legend going around that Don Henley was a practicing Satanist, and I haven't really researched it.
He does dons the cape of a satanic don in several of his live performances. So he kind of puts on this image of a priest and so forth. And I believe he's sang that song, "It Was an Inside Job."
Sorry, I don't know which one that is.
He sings a song about it. I'm 100%, 99% sure it's Don Henley. I don't recall the name of the song, but Alex Jones used to play it on his show all the time. And it's it's about inside jobs. So maybe Don Henley kind of knows some stuff on the inside. But my view is that these are just basically these guys are pretty much CIA bands, and the rumors that you hear about Tim Leary and the Grateful Dead is apparently true as well. They're another CIA band.
Yeah, I could see that.
And their goal was, of course, to promote the LSD culture, as was Huxley's.
Interesting.
The Dead, I mean. So I think that's a good example of the control of the arts. Gaga and Bowie. This is interesting. What did you guys think about Lady Gaga and her connection to Intel? I should add that if you do some research on Intel, you'll find that that's actually a CIA-funded company. Hence the joke inside name, Intel inside, intelligence inside your computer, which is an NSA backdoor, and you can actually find that on mainstream tech websites that we'll discuss, Intel chips. So here's Lady Gaga working with Intel to release what was supposed to be never before seen advanced technology, which I'm pretty sure 3D technology has been around for a long time. So I mean, you see YouTube videos of this, and I'm not sure why this was like a new revelation of any kind. But what did you guys think of that?
I was a little confused about it, to be honest, because there was this big hoopla surrounding Lady Gaga's performance, beforehand. She had all these commercials that had their own kind of esoteric language in them. But in Intel, as far as I can see, their involvement, I guess what this was it was a big to-do because they helped her put on this persona of David Bowie. Mm-hmm. At least that was what the story was. And to be honest, I didn't really see anything that was out of the ordinary besides like her having that holographic image of the lightning bolt across her eye and the spider. Mm-hmm. And then also she was performing at the keyboard and the microphone stand kind of moved on its own a couple times. But by all means, it wasn't any kind of groundbreaking, revolutionary thing. I thought they were going to have a hologram of Bowie,
right,
or something like that, because they made a big scene about this with commercials prior to it. Yeah. And I found it quite odd that, you know, Bowie just died.
Yeah.
And they started immediately promoting Gaga's performance about how she's going. They didn't really say she was going to do Bowie right away, but they said she was going to do this kind of groundbreaking, revolutionary performance. And it was almost like they knew it was going to happen. And I'm not convinced Bowie is dead, to be honest. The timing of it is very suspect. He just released that album.
I'm suspicious of it as well.
And of all people that would fake his own death, I mean, they say this about practically every artist, but I mean, Bowie was definitely a cut above the rest when it comes to like doing some avant-garde stuff.
Well, he was an actor too. Right? He's been in many films, including Labyrinth, As the World Falls Down.
Right, and he played Lucifer in that other film.
Mm-hmm.
The Man That Fell from Earth or something like that.
That's his first, I guess, big film role. Jamie, what do you think about it?
Well, you can't talk about Bowie without occultism because he was clearly an initiate of some things, and he even has in his song called Quickstand, he says, "I'm closer to the golden dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform. I'm not a prophet or a Stone Age man, just a mortal with potential of a Superman." Mm-hmm. So here's somebody who's always been having altars, and that's one of my top 10, you know...
Ziggy.
Ziggy Stardust and many more, but that's one of my top 10 tells or signs that I write about in Hollywood Mind Control about monarch programming. And then you have the whole lightning bolt across the face, which I think is a reference to maybe electroshock therapy that they all go through. And then when Lady Gaga came out, she actually had one of her symbols was a lightning bolt striking her head too. So, and then what did I find? Well, he just has always been interested in Kabbalah and Crowleyism and Egyptology, and he actually said, "My overriding interest was in Kabbalah and Crowley and the whole dark and rather fearsome netherworld of the wrong side of the brain." So here's somebody who's not afraid to kind of explore the darker side and the left-hand path of this whole thing.
I read a funny story about Bowie where he had a period, I don't know if it was in the 70s or 80s at some point, but he was super, super coked up and kind of freaked out and went nuts because he was convinced that I think the witch of L.A. maybe had put a curse on him. So he was like desperately trying to, you know, find some way to, you know, get the Witch of LA's curse removed. It's on them, like a Rolling Stone interview or something, but it's a funny article if you can find it. It's worth reading. But so Bowie's definitely been a wild character to say the least. And I did an analysis of the Jim Henson Labyrinth film where he plays this kind of witch, I guess is the best way to put what he is. He's a strega. And the Italian term for a witch, and you know he's a devil character there, very quite clearly, a Luciferian type character. He's even, you know, always played this androgynous role, and I kind of think Bowie was a pioneer of androgyny, you know, in rock and roll. Also a pioneer of the alternative and indie, you know, genres of music, because he was doing stuff in the 70s and 80s that was, you know, nobody had really seen stuff like this, and then you listen to those older albums and you hear, you know, 80s and 90s alternative pretty clearly borrows from Bowie, and you know all the musicians will even talk about this. You know, I was influenced by Bowie, but that whole notion of androgyny is itself Luciferian. I mean, there's this idea of Baphomet sharing in both aspects of the gender as a perfect the hermaphrodite. It's the idea that the androgyny encompasses, or the hermaphrodite encompasses, the totality, whereas the specific genders of male and female are limited. And that's another big part of alchemy and Hermeticism, is the notion of androgyny, and this also plays into alchemy because that's an actual stage in the alchemical process.
Yeah, speaking of Bowie and the '90s stuff, he influenced Nine Inch Nails and Trent Reznor to make the Downward Spiral album, because that was a concept album from start to finish,
Mm-hmm.
and they cited David Bowie's Low album as what inspired them to do that. Well, when they recorded Downward Spiral, Trent Reznor bought the house at 1050 Cielo Drive, which is where Sharon Tate and
Mm-hmm.
the rest of her Folger and JC bringing them all were slaughtered by the Manson family.
Mm-hmm.
And when he recorded it, he was talking about how he was experiencing all these kind of crazy feelings, and it kind of drove him mad. So he sold the house, but he took the front door with him and moved it to New Orleans to his next house.
Yep.
And since then, they've actually torn down that entire house and rebuilt on it. But again, we're talking about the kind of the fruit of Bowie's spirit there, influencing others, and Nine Inch Nails, which is obviously, their intentions. They're into nihilism, and the 9 Inch Nails are supposedly the nails that were on the crucifixion on the cross.
Yeah, and both Marilyn Manson kind of got his start through Trent Reznor, and Manson has a role to some degree in LaVey's Church of Satan, and I don't know that Trent Reznor is necessarily a member, but I know he's I think met LaVey at one time and kind of hung out in those same circles. So there's definitely a satanic component to Nine Inch Nails, whether it's for theatrics and show or whether he takes it serious to some degree. I don't know. I haven't read enough on Trent Reznor, but but you're absolutely right about those influences. And in fact, the excuse me, if you read or if you watch David Lynch's Lost Highway, I believe I know there's a Bowie song on there, and it sounds just like Nine Inch Nails. Trent Reznor may have been involved in that Bowie song on the Lost Highway soundtrack, but that's also a very occultic, satanic movie, and I have an analysis of that as well. But yeah, this cross-referencing here in all these same circles, and I was friends with a girl who was a DJ in European techno scenes, and she did her music video with the guy who did Bowie's video. So she was kind of telling me that this back several months ago that this coming Bowie video is going to be super occultic and esoteric, and I just recently watched it, and so Jamie, I think, has some interesting thing. I noticed quite a bit in this Black Star video. I don't know if you saw it, but as you pointed out, it's curious that it's coming out. The whole album is hyped right at the point of his death, and then
2 days after.
Yeah, and then he even references his death, kind of in these videos. And I think, didn't he die on his birthday?
I think so.
Yeah, that's completely.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
Well,
but what'd you notice, Jamie?
Since you mentioned the director of the video, his name was Johan Renck.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about Crowley. He says, well, I'm a huge Crowley fan. I've always been. I tried to make a movie on his life a few years ago, but we didn't manage to put it together. I love Crowley for being an audacious man at a certain point in time. I think he's greatly misunderstood. He was a good guy, but he was portrayed as an evil man, and he wasn't. So right there you have, direct proof reference to, Aleister Crowley, which we always try to bring it back to.
Yeah, it seems like his influences felt forever and will never go away, it seems.
Yeah, and so when you watch, this video, Black Star, it's really kind of creepy and disturbing, and it has lots of weird imagery, and it would take a long time to go through it all, but basically it's about transhumanism and apotheosis with some flair of voodoo and sex magic thrown in.
Yeah, don't they show him? It's been a while. I watched it when it first came out. I think they showed him going into like the Black Sun or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know William Ramsey did a really good video on it because I watched it through the first time, and I wasn't really watching as much as I was listening to it, because I was like, oh, okay, Bowie's got a new album. Because I didn't get the last one, but I got the one before it. Because I kind of dig Bowie's music, but I didn't really notice a ton. I mean, I noticed some stuff, but not a ton. And then I watched Ramsey's breakdown, and I was like, holy crap, there is a lot on here. And then he died. So.
Yeah, there's a good article at a site I read, one of the sites I read called Radix Journal, and Alexander Dugin, who's a Russian philosopher who's promoted some of my stuff. He's actually a former advisor to Putin. Dugin has a whole analysis of Bowie, of all people. Putin's former advisor did an analysis of Bowie. And this article is called Bowie the Initiated. And he talks about Bowie being a journeyer, a traveler of the left-hand path, and that Bowie, did have, at least to some degree, an interest in Thelema, but there's just so much in that video that it kind of starts out with him in the spacesuit. I guess that's kind of Ziggy Stardust, or the man who fell from Earth, or whatever, and then like you said, he sort of hovers away into the black sun or the black star or whatever. But this is, once again, right away, it's alchemical. It's a reference to, Negredo stage of putrefaction or whatever in alchemy. And then we kind of have this sort of what looks like either a Quaker ceremony or some kind of charismatic ceremony up in a nasty, funky attic where these guys are like shaking around, like, and interestingly, I've actually read a lot of Crowleyans who will make a connection between charismatic so-called Christian theology and practice and voodoo, and they'll talk about how charismaticism is very similar to voodoo, and in their mind at least a direct path to the idea of voodoo, of being possessed through the dance, and that's what we start to see in this video. Jamie, what do you think?
It's just really so much imagery in there that it could take a long time to.
Well, he kind of looks like a voodoo doll, like he's wearing that thing over his face. Okay,
so that thing across his eyes, I'm reading right now, he's playing like 3 different characters in this thing. He's playing someone who hasn't been initiated yet, and that's why he's got the wrap around his eyes with the buttonholes. And so this is kind of like the the blind masses of people who don't know about esoteric things. And then he's kind of playing a preacher with this Bible with the black star on it and getting people to follow him. And then also kind of a trickster who takes over Bowie with like his, spirit possession with the strange dancing and all that.
Yeah, speaking of voodoo, I don't want to take us off course here too much, because I actually do have something I wanted to bring up about Gaga's Bowie performance, but I just recently found that I was just casually doing some research for leisure on the history of zombies, because I watched The Walking Dead, and it turns out, and maybe people know this, it was news to me, but there's a guy named William Seabrook from the late 1800s who was this occultist and a cannibal and a journalist and a world traveler, and he actually wrote the very first zombie story. So he's kind of like the godfather of zombie stuff. And, I saw that he was an occultist, and I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, besides the fact that he's a cannibalist, too, that's interesting. But turns out he actually wrote about time he spent with Aleister Crowley in Seabrook's book called Witchcraft, Its Power in the World Today.
Huh.
And like any good occultist who takes it too far, he committed suicide when he died.
Yeah, right.
They kind of go mad with this stuff.
Yeah.
So perhaps Bowie, maybe he faked his death, maybe he committed suicide. The videos suggest that he's kind of taken his occultism to a new level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that aspect of the video, that he's ramping it up. And for many of these people, it's the action of the arts that is the ritual, right? So your aesthetic production is part of your ritual enactment, and that's the role of the magus, right? Is kind of an artist who creates not just artwork, but also tries to create and influence perception and create a magical view of the artist as magus, right? So to give the impression that you're some sort of channel of the divine or whatever through the manipulation of forms and symbols in your art.
That's funny you say that, because when I saw the commercial for Gaga talking about how she was going to use Intel to create this revolutionary performance,
She says it's magic.
yes, but if you look at so I went online afterwards because I thought, well, I didn't really see that much. There's some articles that talk about the process that they took in order to make that performance happen, and it sounds like a lot actually went into it, but they call it her magic ring. If you notice, she wore a ring that had a big kind of sphere on top of it.
Right.
And when she would move that ring, I guess that corresponded to different movements that happened on the LED screen behind her and such. So again, we're magic. She's the magus, kind of putting on the performance, the ritual.
The magic ring's pretty classic in witchcraft, and because I guess King Solomon was in the possession of this so-called magic ring where he could use to control the demons to build his temple for him.
Mm. And I think his had the not a pentagram. Was it a pentagram on it?
Yeah.
Or Seal of Solomon?
And the Seal of Solomon, right?
Okay. But yeah, in Gaga's commercial, they show her going through the cube, and the cube is the Saturn symbolism.
Right.
And Intel's logo's got the ring around it, implying the ring of Saturn.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that would apply to the dominance of time and space in terms of Earth. And so, like, for example, in 2001 A Space Odyssey, I deal with Saturn symbolism and, the cube and all that. And the cube is interesting because it's the 6 spatial directions that you could go. So in basic, Pythagoreanism or geometry, you get the cube by extending from a point to a line to a plane, and then you stick another point, line, and plane on top of that, and you get 2D, and then you get to 3D. So this encompasses the dimensions in which we inhabit, right? So the cube is, of course, again, the hexagram, and so that's why even in ancient times they conceived of Saturn as Kronos, right, the ruler of time and space. So since we inhabit time and space, Kronos is a kind of archon or deity that runs time and space. It's also viewed as a kind of prison. So the mastery of time and space on the part of these artistic presentations would be, again, that reference to the magus, because the magus can operate outside of time and space. But really, it's illusion, right? It's trickery, and that's why at the beginning of that video, Gaga says, technology is nothing but magic. And this is Arthur C. Clarke's third law, that there's no significant distinction between advanced technology and the practice of magic.
Interesting. And Gaga also, she was kind of inducted into all of this, and a few years ago, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, she was doing a performance at the Grammys in which she came out in a giant egg, and that egg, ironically, is also supposedly what the flower of life symbolism means that we saw from Coldplay. So it's almost like she was brought out with this, and she's advancing into things.
Yeah, and if anyone doubts that, you can look up her associations with, I think she's Romanian or Bulgarian, a witch named Maria Abramovich. And what Maria Abramovich is into is this really weird avant-garde performance art. And so she would do this stuff like go sit nude in a chair, out in public somewhere, and maybe have like a plate of chicken on her lap, and then she would just sit there for a day, and then everybody's walking by and they're all weirded out, and so this is supposed to be performance art. And interestingly, she influenced both Shia LaBeouf and Gaga. So there's a video interview with Lady Gaga about Maria Abramovich, and she's, I love her so much, and she's influenced my performances. And so then you can watch this video of Gaga doing performance art in the style of this witch named Maria, and it's obviously really weird. But she goes on to talk about in that video that she's going to create, I think what she calls House of Gaga. I don't know if it's actually been built or not, but she's going to create this big center where you go, and it's going to be this kind of ritual journey where you'll walk through this big facility. I'm not joking. And you will participate in all of these, quote, artistic experiments, including things like sensory deprivation, right? Wow. So you're going to walk into a room and wear a mask, and you're going to hear, weird Gaga sounds or something. this was supposed to be like her, pioneering this new transition of the arts and a melding of the different mediums of art. But what it sounds like to me is a bunch of mind control.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up that name Abramovich, because Lady Gaga did, like you said, she did some avant-garde imagery with her before, which had they depicted her with horns on her head like the devil. Mm-hmm. But she also worked with Jay-Z, of all people, on one of his videos for that last album he had, Magna Carta, Holy Grail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
you did a piece on that. That was really good. Yeah.
It's odd. It's odd how a rapper, drug dealer like Jay-Z gets involved with a Romanian witch. But again, like everything else, it all ties together.
Well, let's talk about who dominated the whole show. Taylor Swift. She, I guess, took all the awards, or most of the awards this year, and I thought it was interesting that when she got up there, the first thing that she said was "girl power," right? So she's like touting feminism, and we've seen her give these comments in the past where she's like, "Oh yeah, I'm now a feminist, by the way. I used to be a good girl, and I wanted to be feminine." She's like, "But then I realized that if you're a girl, you're going to get screwed over. So you got to be a strong, empowered girl." And so she gave this warning to aspiring pop girls out there that don't let any guys take the credit for your work. And her video Bad Blood, which I hadn't really paid attention to, but Jamie pointed out, interestingly, that if you watch that video, it's her and a bunch of, I guess, models and hotties and other pop stars like Ellie Goulding, and they're all working for intelligence. So it's like Cindy Crawford's like the handler, and they're all a bunch of spies, which is a theme that I've written about quite a bit.
Well, she even in the beginning is betrayed by her spy partner, and then she's pushed out a window and dies, and then she's taken underground and rebuilt into a new model. So that's another reference to Monarch Control.
And anytime you see the initiate going underground, that is classic symbolism of someone undergoing the occult transformation.
Death, burial, resurrection, Hiram Abiff style stuff, yeah.
Yes, just like Alice in Wonderland and whatnot.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in Alice in Wonderland, but she does go underground, yeah. What did you make of Taylor and her dominance this year?
Well, it was interesting because several years ago, we remember they had that whole fiasco where Beyonce won an award, or Taylor Swift won an award, and Kanye gets up and he says, "I'm gonna let you finish," but I think Beyonce had one of the best videos of all time, and proceeds to kind of take Taylor Swift's time in the spotlight away from her and make himself a fool. But when she comes back on the stage, when Beyonce wins her award, she invites Taylor Swift back on the stage, and the interesting thing about that was that now they're both wearing red dresses, so this is kind of symbolic of Taylor Swift has gone through a hazing and is now, sort of a new initiate into this Scarlet Woman Club of the Illuminati.
Interesting.
From a non-conspiratorial perspective, if you look at it strictly from a commercial, financial kind of point of view, it seems like there is always a battle to see who can become the mouthpiece defender of some kind of movement.
Yes.
For example, what's his name? Bruce Jenner. He's trying to become the leader of the LGBT movement. Miley Cyrus, the same argument.
Well, and I think where you're going with that is that that's a very profitable, lucrative position to be in, right?
Yeah, and it bugs me because these, and what I'm getting at is Beyonce and Taylor Swift, like they're battling to see who can be the hero of the feminist movement. But
exactly,
what bugs me is, like, for example, Miley Cyrus, like, the LGBT community should be able to see through her and be like, look, you're not even gay, like, move on, like, let someone who's really gay and done whatever fill in the void. But that's not what the handlers want. The handlers want people that they can control to steer the movement.
Exactly. Bingo.
So,
and that's the thing, is that these positions are commodities, right?
Yeah. Yeah, sadly.
Yeah, no, so it's not just that the artists are products and commodities, which they are, which are very valuable, worth millions and millions of dollars, but it's also being the face of some movement that is very lucrative and powerful and, can easily be engineered and manipulated. Well, that makes me think, too, about Jamie has some interesting points about other videos, like Taylor Swift's video, where you see these pop stars playing the role of CIA agents or spies. And so you have Britney doing this in her video Toxic, where and they all have to kill somebody, which is interesting because in espionage, all the way back to James Bond, and this is based in reality, the attaining the status of 00, so to become 007, to get the license to kill, you have to kill. And so Bond doesn't get that until he's committed murder on behalf of the state, of course, which makes it so magically legal. But you have, in Break the Ice, that Jamie pointed out, Britney's a spy again there, and you always have the notion of the clones. Clones pop up a lot, too, in these videos where they've got, these backups, right? There's all these backup Britneys and pop stars.
Well,
ready to roll out.
Has to break into the clone lab and fight the Men in Black off,
right.
And it's underground at this kind of Eyes Wide Shut elite party that she finds the lab with all her clones in it, and she blows it up. And then that one you mentioned, Lady Gaga and Paparazzi, she poisons her boyfriend as well, wearing a Mickey Mouse costume. Oh, yeah,
exactly. What do you think about that? Do you think there might be some reference to, like, maybe you have to make a kill to, well, that's actually in mafia stuff, too. In the real world mafia realm, you're not a made man until you've made a kill.
Yeah, that's right. The blood sacrifice is the age-old practice that they've done since the beginning of time, practically, and to think that it's gone away is kind of naive. I believe. I think that society wants to believe that that's not something that happens, so we pretend it doesn't exist. But if you look at a lot of these beliefs of these occultist and Illuminati types, they follow ancient practices and belief systems.
Yeah.
So to think that they pick and choose and don't conduct the blood sacrifice, I personally think is a little naive. We see it with the Bohemian Grove cremation of care ceremony, which is kind of like the most damning evidence, if you ask me, when you have all of these kind of elite, politicians and CEOs and even entertainers showing up at the Bohemian Grove and putting on this show of a sacrifice of a child.
Yeah.
To the Moloch, not Moloch, I guess it's the Minerva owl statue or whatever it is. But yeah, that was like a concept I delved into with my hip hop book, and all of these kind of ancient cultures all did it for various reasons. It was mostly to appease the gods, and I believe that these modern day occultists are trying to appease their god.
Well, isn't that kind of what your book is all premised about, is the sacrifice that they have to perform to get to the level that they're at, with girls like Jennifer Hudson. Her whole family died soon after she became famous, and then got even more famous and took the place of Whitney Houston. And
that's right.
You think of any more?
Yeah, even we were talking about Lady Gaga a second ago. Even there's a theory that she was involved in the sacrifice of a girl, and I don't remember her name. I want to say it was Stephanie or Stefano or something. Anyways, there was a girl, if you kind of do some Googling, you can find it. There was a girl who looked, acted, and sounded just like Lady Gaga. Then she died, and then after she died, Lady Gaga took on her persona and become who she is today.
Well, that's part of witchcraft and voodoo, is like when you kill something, and especially if you eat it, you're taking on their power. Yeah. Exactly.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. So there's more support for that theory.
Well, the voodoo idea of you mentioned the zombie earlier. The zombie eats the brain or the innards because eating the brain or the heart, right, transfers the power of that organ to you.
Yes.
And I would add too that so something that Jamie pointed out to me, that if anybody doubts this having a religious, well, I want to say too that in Dave McGowan's book, if anybody thinks this idea of ritual killing is far-fetched, all of those early bands that you look at in terms of the counterculture hippie movement, everybody had people who died very close to them, and some of the people in those formative bands, like the Byrds, the Doors, so forth, they had a lot of people die around them. So, in other words, this idea of them possibly being killed or sacrificed is not too far-fetched, especially when we consider, as I said, the mafia is real. We all know the mafia is real. And according to, mainline testimony of former people in the mafia, Senate committee hearings and so forth, the idea of being a made man does include killing somebody, as well as I said, British intelligence license to kill. That's real, according to, former spies. So, this idea is not far-fetched. And talk about the Church of Bay. That blew me away. I couldn't believe that.
Okay, so, yeah, we're talking about these pop stars being elevated to essentially religious leaders, or even they think they're gods themselves. And it's no surprise that now we have a cult surrounding Beyonce that's growing and growing. And even so far, the news even says Beyonce is infallible, and can she do anything wrong? And so whatever she says is right. And it was the article in Rolling Stone actually called something like, I can't remember, something about Slay. But yeah, definitely that they are our new gods to worship. And this is what I talk a lot about in my new book, Hollywood Mind Control, in the first chapter, is that these are the stars that mankind is meant to follow now, instead of actual astrology, and for navigation and things we look to the stars in Hollywood.
Yeah, and it was funny to me that I came across one of these BuzzFeed type sites called Elite Daily, and the senior women's issues writer wrote this firsthand testimony of her religious experience at a Beyonce concert. And she's not joking, she literally calls it a religious experience. And Beyonce was the redeemer who saved the tired, sweaty crowd from their,
Well, I remember this one performance, I don't know if it was VMAs or Grammys, but she marches out very militant-like, and she sings If I Were a Boy and a couple other songs. But at one point, she points to somebody in the front row, and she puts her hand under his chin and elevates him up to her eye level, and then pushes him back. So whether or not this was, a planned stage magic thing, which probably was, it still sends a message that these people have godlike powers.
Absolutely. But it's all perception and illusion, right?
Yeah.
It's not real, obviously, but that's kind of like Michael Aquino writes in his book, that if you can manage the perception of people to think that you're a god, then you might as well be a god, because they're going to treat you like one.
Well, I thought it was weird that no one even ever mentioned that part of the performance, because it was, it stood out to me that she actually did a magic trick of David Blaine, or,
David Copperfield.
Yeah, something like that, and no one ever said anything about it.
But don't say Copperfield. Well, that was an interesting conversation. I think that ties up the Super Bowl and the Grammys. So
yeah, the last thing I want to mention about the Grammys that I saw in there was that the miniature stage, not the main one, but the one that was more out, the circular stage, when you looked at it from above, it was clearly a circle with an X, and if you know any of my work, you know that that is the mark of the beast according to the Typhonian OTO. And if you want to learn even more about that symbol, you can pick up my book, Hollywood Mind Control, where it talks about the Enuma Elish and the center of the universe and the god Marduk and all those, and how that was also his cult symbol.
Right. Isaac, what should we look at to encapsulate your work? You have do you want to promote some of your books?
Yeah, I've got a lot. I've probably got too much out there. So if you go to Illuminatiwatcher.com, that's where you can find all of my miscellaneous stuff. I've got a free email subscription deal where what that does is when you sign up, it starts to walk you through kind of like the history of the website, and I pull out kind of the best articles, and they're all examples of what we've been talking about here with conspiracy theories hidden in pop culture and entertainment. Mm-hmm. And, you can find links. It depends, like I was talking about on the first hour, I got lots of videos on YouTube. I got all kinds of stuff out there. It just depends on what people where they want to meet up. So go to Illuminatiwatcher.com, and if you dig around, you can find whatever your preference is.
Excellent. And Jamie's book, Hollywood Mind Control, can be purchased at freemantv.com. Also have a link at Jay's Analysis where you'll see her book there. If you click on the picture, it'll take you to the site where you can purchase it. And so, yeah, it was a great conversation. Before we conclude, remember I just want to get one final comment on remember the London Olympics with the dead babies and all that?
Oh, yeah.
What do you guys think of that? I mean, if anybody doubted,
I don't support dead babies if that's what.
No, but I mean, if anybody doubted, this being a real thing, as I understand, it was Danny Boyle, or the director who did Slumdog Millionaire and the film Trance, which is kind of about a mind control MK Ultra thing.
Yeah, you just didn't have to watch the whole thing because there was this whole part where they rolled out all these little babies, the nurses did, and then there was like a big black giant wizard that was going all over them,
right.
And then they had Russell Brand singing John Lennon on top of a
VW
bus.
I forgot about that.
So I think the 2012 Olympics was a huge mega ritual of the, highest
That's probably
caliber.
the craziest one I can recall.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were pretty overt about it with the pyramid and whatnot on the stage.
Yeah. All right. Well, you've been listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and tonight our guest was Isaac Weishaupt of Illuminatiwatcher.com. And so go ahead and check that out and come back next time. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Isaac.